Let's welcome aboard right now Dr. Frank Alberta, shoulder and elbow surgeon at Rothman Orthopedics. To learn more about their New Jersey locations, go to rothmannj.com. Hey, Doc, thank you for the time this morning. We appreciate it. And what was your take on, even though the MRI was clean on Jacob deGrom, do you think after this 10-day IL stint, everything will be ready and set to go?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it, and hopefully we can, put some of the Mets fans at ease here. But if the MRI is clean and he doesn't have a real tendon injury, and it doesn't look like there's any significant strain to the muscle itself or damage in the muscle, then this is, usually measured in, days to weeks kind of thing. And that's the biggest thing that you can take away from an MRI in this instance is that as long as there's no tendon injury where it attaches to the bone or ligament injury, then the chances are that he can bounce back pretty quickly.
Dr. Alberta, last week, it was a right lat discomfort that he had. Now it's right side discomfort with some lower back discomfort. Is all of that connected, or are these two separate issues?
It's probably all connected. Obviously not having the opportunity to examine them or see exactly what they're talking about. Those kind of things are generally interrelated, right? The problem areas are as you get closer to the shoulder, the lat is the big muscle that makes that sort of V shape on your back, starts from your armpit in the back and goes all the way down to sort of the mid to lower back. So at the bottom, it's very muscular and it's attached or interplays with all the other muscles in the back and helps with all the, the twisting and all your core strength. Whereas at the top is when we get into trouble and we start thinking about, tendon injuries to the latissimus, and those are closer to the shoulder. So as long as it stays further down, it's probably related to the previous tightness or soreness he had last week. Again, not having any specific information, but that's a good sign, whereas opposed to, being closer to the shoulder tends to be a little more worrisome.
Doc, do you think the Mets made a mistake, putting him on the mound on Sunday, even though the MRI was clean last week?
No, these muscle things are all very difficult, right? And team physicians and medical staff have a very difficult position because you have a player who's almost always saying that they feel good and, they want to get back out there and they feel good to participate. And you're trying to balance that with what you know about the actual diagnostic studies. And if you don't have any evidence on an MR that there's, actual damage, then I think I wouldn't really second guess them too much, again, without the, having the ability to look at the patient.
Okay, so Dr. Frank Alberta is joining us from Rothman Orthopedics. So if you're going to recommend rest here because there's nothing structural, how much are we talking about? Like, what can we expect, and what are some of the positive milestones where Mets fans will know that deGrom's sort of heading in the right direction?
Yeah, I think I saw that they listed him on a 10-day IL today, and if that's the case, they're expecting this to be muscular only. That would require a couple days of rest and treatment where you're doing mostly ice and maybe some electric stim treatments and ultrasound and those kind of things to reduce any inflammation or soreness he has around the muscle. And then they work through range of motion and strengthening, and then, probably get him back out throwing within about a week and see how he feels. And then, as with all of these things, the first step is no pain, full range of motion before you start to throw. And then you try to throw and make sure that he stays in that pain-free state. So, usually, again, with these muscles, without any structural damage, if you do go back too soon, you tend to have re-injuries or you tend to have kind of flare-ups. And that's probably, what we're seeing now. And assuming that it's a similar area and a similar problem. But I think that 10 to 14 days is pretty typical for how long these things will take before he's like fully ready and back to his normal.
All right. Concern level here, you think 10 to 14 days here, Doc, when would you be concerned? If it's more than 10 to 14 days?
I think that you start getting concerned when you hit the 3-week mark, where you still have some issues with returning because, with pitchers, obviously rest days and things like that come into play when he's throwing and schedules. So, if it doesn't fall exactly in 10 to 14 days, I wouldn't be too concerned. But at 3 weeks, if you're still having symptoms and you're still having delays in terms of him getting to that next stage or being able to get to the mound to throw even in a bullpen, then I'd start to get a little concerned that there's something more going on.
All right, last one quickly, Doc, would be this, is that what's the next date in terms of the ramp up here? You mentioned about rest, ice, treatment here before you start to ramp up and see where he feels. When do you think that ramp up begins here for deGrom to see if he's over this injury?
Yeah, I think it's a week. It's a week or so before you start to see some progress where you're ready to test it.
Gotcha.
And that'll be that first time that he probably gets out there and throws a little bit. And he may do some throwing before that without really ramping it up to stress it too much. But usually it's about a week where we'll keep these pitchers tied down. And then if at that point he's able to throw on the side or throw in a bullpen, then that's a good sign, as long as he doesn't have any flare-ups after that.